Hello and welcome. Today is my birthday, so happy birthday to me. And I can't think of a better way to spend 10 or 15 minutes of my birthday than chatting a bit about Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon. This is the most recent book that I finished. And following this chat, I'll also touch base briefly on what I'm currently reading as well as what my planned next read is going to be. But yeah, Star Maker by Olaf Stapledon. I'm continuing on with my December month of rereading, so I am rereading this. Last time I read this, according to my notes, was in June of 2013. And I wanted to read this. Even after that, I knew immediately that sometime I'm going to have to get around to rereading this book because it's quite a trip to go on, which I'll explain here in a bit. But this book was originally published. Olaf Stapledon is a British writer. I guess you could sort of say science fiction. I think he was a philosopher as well. So this book was originally published in 1937, and then this particular electronic edition that I read was published in 2011 in the UK by Gateway, I guess, publishers, Gateway Books. It is what it's about is it's an unnamed narrator who lives, I guess, in a suburb outside London, and one night he goes, and I guess he's sort of frustrated with just sort of the everyday sort of frustrations of life, and he goes in the night and sits on a sort of a hillside there near his house. He can see his house in the distance, which he lives in with his wife, and I think he mentions children, but none of these people are ever named. But he starts sort of just, I guess, looking at the stars and whatnot, and through this process, he is psychically transported through space. He starts this sort of journey. To him, he was actually going on this journey, and he, travels through our solar system and travels really then on into deep space. And eventually, he comes across a planet that has life on it, that has sort of humanoid life. Of course, they've evolved differently, so they don't look quite like Earth humans. But, this starts a process through, he's able to eventually establish a sort of psychic contact with various people. Some people get frightened by his contact with them, but others are more receptive to it. And he does develop a psychic relationship with another person on this original planet. And then ultimately they set out on a journey then and explore psychically, other planets in the galaxy. And we kind of learn that they are able to at first really only psychically connect with other beings that are very similar to us just because of the psychic nature of their connection. So it takes them a while as their little band, their little party grows, that their experience diversifies then, and they're able to go to other worlds and more different worlds, and then very different consciousnesses. For example, with the stars, with suns, and with nebula. So they're able to then they start forming what they call a cosmic mind. It's really a galactic mind, and then they start trying to contact other galaxies. Which are even more alien than the life in our galaxy. So I'm not really giving away spoilers because this is really not plot driven at all. It's really it's really more of a philosophic and imaginative sort of exploration of the cosmos, because we really learn a lot about ourselves really by looking at other cultures, right? Other cultures and other consciousnesses in the galaxy. It sounds like, maybe when I'm describing it, it sounds a little light, but so I'm really not able to describe it. It would be, it's pretty in depth what we learn about the different worlds. Some of them, evolve. Some of them hit snags. Some of them are destroyed by natural phenomena. Some are destroyed by other defects in their biology, or more often, I guess, in their culture, which causes them to either stagnate or decline or be destroyed altogether. And So this is really discussed, really beautiful. Parts of it are really quite beautiful. So, my thoughts about the book, of the world building in this, I'm not a science fiction writer, but if I were a science fiction writer and I was kind of interested to learn about world building, the craft of writing and world building, I think this book would be a good place to start, because it really does a good job of describing these other consciousnesses, other humanoids, they're not all humanoids, but mostly humanoids at first, because like I said, the psychic energy attracts like to like, so it's easier to contact those and connect with those who are more fit your psychic profile as well. And then so something alien, it takes them a while even to recognize it as a consciousness, sometimes if it's really alien to us. So there's all types of worlds. There's ocean worlds, there's symbiotes, beings that are symbiotic with each other. There's people who evolved with a mixture between animal and plant, so they're both. There are people who, they're sort of insectoids, worlds where the intelligence is a group, kind of a group mind, and that's kind of a recurring theme, I think, in the book, is this idea of community versus individuality, because in the book that's explored a lot, and a lot of times cultures and civilizations go wrong because of an imbalance between one or the other. They're either too individualistic, and so they don't survive, or they're too communal and they stagnate and don't survive. So it takes a balance, I think, I gathered from the book, at least that seems to be, the successful cultures have a balance between this community versus individuality. And so the book, other thoughts about it, so that was described really well, I think, in the book, about how a person can be a part of a group, because, like I said, the original character, this Englishman, eventually joins with this other person who's, this planet's called the Other Men, and then lots of other beings too. But he maintains his individuality while still being in a community, and I think that's really our experience of life usually, right? We all want to be individual, but then we need a community too. So we actually need both, not one or the other. So there needs to be a balance between the two. So finding that right balance is, one of the challenges of politics, and at least here in the U.S., it seems like individuality, what's good for the individual versus what's good for the society as a whole. So, yeah, other thoughts about it. So along this idea of immensity, it really reminded me of the book Poetics of Space, The Poetics of Space by Gaston Bachelard. I actually meant to call this book cover up to just show you that cover, because it's been a long time since I did this this book chat. So let me just see if I can find that real quick, because the Poetics of Space, Gaston Bachelard, in this book, I did a chat on it, which I'll link to in the details below, but he uses the concept of homes and houses and furniture and roofs and corners and things to really expand, using these kind of small things through language. We're able to actually expand into an immensity. So, for example, a shell, if it's used right in poetics, in language, it can actually make you feel like you're in a giant space, even though you're in a shell. So he gave examples of this in the Poetics of Space, and I really felt that in this book as well. There's actually a quote from the book that I think I'll read. I thought I would read because it kind of illustrates that really well. And it just sort of gives you also an idea of the type of language that's in this book, which I think is really beautiful in a way. And it's more poetic and more philosophical than in what a lot of science fiction today. Granted, this is 1937, remember, so a little bit of a different era in writing science fiction perhaps. But anyway, here's the quote. "I perceived that I was on a little round grain of rock and metal, filmed with water and with air, whirling in sunlight and darkness, and on the skin of that little grain all the swarms of men, generation by generation, had lived in labor and blindness, with intermittent joy and intermittent lucidity of spirit, and all their history with its folk wanderings, its empires, its philosophies, its proud sciences, its social revolutions, its increasing hunger for community, was but a flicker in one day in the lives of stars." So, to me, that's a really beautiful quote, but it also illustrates this sort of immensity. This quote comes following at the early part of the book, where he's looking down and seeing his little small house, his little small life that he has there on Earth. Eventually, becomes this immense cosmic cosmos, the whole cosmos, and the Star Maker then is ultimately the, sort of the mover, the grand mover of all things, the person, not person, obviously, the force who sort of spins out universes. Our universe is not the actual only one, and it's been a cycle. So just like planets come in, just like lives come and go, we get these stages. Lives come and go, planets come and go, stars come and go, nebula come and go, galaxies come and go, and universes come and go, and maybe even star makers come and go. So, a lot of layers there, but it was just a really in-depth, really beautiful thing to read, and really mind-bending in parts, and really, and a really wonderful, imaginative journey to go on. There was another quote that I love from this book that I wrote down. It's from one of the worlds. Some of the worlds are destined to not survive for various reasons, but he writes, "In a sick world, even the hale are sick," which I love that line. Even in a sick world, if your community's sick, if your society's sick, if your world is sick, and you're part of that world, then no matter how healthy you are, then you're also in a sense sick. So I love that quote. In a sick world, even the hale are sick. So yeah. All right. Well. I'm really glad I reread this book. I have been, it's been 4.5 years or so since I read it, and I have been wanting to read it ever since, so I had it in my mind to get it reread this December, and I'm really glad I picked it because it was a wonderful journey to go on. So what I'm reading now is Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. This book is at its 20th anniversary of publication, and I read this about 20 years ago last time. I was really curious how I'd react to it, because I really loved it when I read it when it first came out. I actually read it twice, almost back to back. I read it originally, and then I waited a little bit, and then I read it again. So this was actually my third reading, but it's the last time I read this was probably 19 or 20 years ago. Glad to get this reread. It's a historical fiction. I was reminded of this recently because of a tag. There was a tag about favorite historical fiction set in your culture, or some question like that. And I remembered this book, and so I thought, I need to get this reread in December. So I'll have a chat on this coming up very soon. I'm more than halfway done, so the chat should be pretty quick. And then my next planned read is called The Liberation of Life by Charles Birch and John Cobb. Just a blurb from this. The concept of life, be it the life or the cell or the human community, is in a bondage fashioned by the interpreters of life ever since biology began. This book is primarily about the liberation of the concept of life, and secondly about the liberation of the life of humans and non-humans alike. So when I read this, it's been many years ago. I was in college. I think it was around 1983 or 1984. And so I'm real curious to read this again, because this was really meaningful to me back then. And so I'm real curious to see what this book has to say to me at my current age, several decades down the road. So looking forward to getting this reread as well. And then December, I'm not sure if I'll get to another book to reread. I hope to get to at least one more book in December for rereading. And then I'll be ready to start my priority reading list for 2018. So a lot coming up. Stay tuned. Take care. Bye.